what I chose to do for the South by Southwest audience was, I talked a little bit about zero trust and how they say assume breach, right? Which is a good assumption for both people and organizations. I suggested as well, they need to start assuming tracking. So assume breach, yes. Assume tracking, absolutely. Which is, that's not a piece of advice that's sort of actionable other than making you think before you share things you don't want to get out there. The other joke that might be made, and especially given where Identiverse is held these days, what happens on the internet stays on the internet. So like being aware is sort of the first thing. In terms of doing something about it as an individual, that can be really tough. There are things you can take on board that require some friction in your life to do. And that's not something I generally want to ask people to do. When it comes to identity professionals and what we can all do to support the efforts to give people more choice, give people more transparency when they are consumers of businesses and when you work for those businesses, I think we have to, if we take ID Pro's vision seriously, we have to try to do that. And that requires understanding the value that is being created for the business of each of those pieces of data. So when you were talking about data governance, Jim, I totally agree. The way that a privacy professional would see that is it's kind of a risk assessment for each piece of data collected. What I think we've been forgetting is the value assessment.
This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Oh, not so bad yourself?
Doing great. So I've got a theory I've been working on, which is that we are at a current point, which is the widest gap between laggard IAM and next-gen IAM. So we got Eve on today, as everybody knows, right? It's in the title of the of the show.
Surprise!
We're going to be talking a lot of next-gen stuff. I think every once in a while we've run into a project and it's something like, yeah, the way we do access is we've got this Word document and we fill it out and it says, make Eve like Jeff. And then we just do that. And you're just like, oh boy, you gotta be kidding me. And I think we're at the widest gap. I think that first scenario isn't really that far from what you'd find maybe in more places 20 years ago. But now the next gen is non-human identities. It's the decentralized identity. So there's all these new areas that are cropping up and it's getting more interesting. And like, how does all this new technology fit into what we're doing? But there's unfortunately still organizations that are struggling with that basic blocking and tackling. What do you think?
Okay, so I think I know where you're going with it. I don't know if I agree, though, only because you and I in our day jobs, we see pretty much the worst of IAM, right? You don't call identity consultants when things are going great, right? It's like, oh, I need help with something. And a lot of the companies that you and I deal with, I don't know if I would call them laggards. I would call them average as far as IAM maturity goes, because there are still a lot of organizations, too many, that still haven't made investments that I would call like basic IAM technologies. And I think of things like identity governance, to help with automation and things like that. And I think of, privileged access management tools. And then, I think the most investment that's happened over the last 5 to 10 years has really been more on the authentication side, especially when COVID hit. It was like, oh, everybody's working from home. And remember how we didn't have MFA? Well, we better sure have it now. So let's get that rolled out. And so I think authentication has sort of become relatively standard, but I don't know if I would call laggard and next gen, just knowing how many companies haven't even caught up to what you were kind of referring to as like the laggard part. I think that's pretty average. It's far rarer that I see like truly next gen IAM. And I don't mean like a fancier IGA. I think of things that are more like API based, They're using things like shared steel framework or CAPE or other types of orchestrations that are almost UI-less. It's orchestration, it's policy-based, it's adaptive, right? And it's using data rather than just another way to collect a form on somebody, whether it's a Word form or a ServiceNow form or whatever it may be. Like I see getting rid of that touch point as really sort of the next gen, and then using the data off that to do policy-based decisions, risk-based decisions, right? Things like that.
Yeah, I think that you're right about the authentication piece. I think that's where a lot of organizations have put their investment. I think that by laggard, you can say laggard in terms of investing in other areas that are also important, privileged access management, in terms of user management, in terms of, on the external side where you have a lot of people trying to penetrate. But I also think when you talk about some of these next gen things like non-human identity management, like decentralized identity, you can't even worry about those things until you get the basic blocking and tackling done, right?
Well, you could worry about it. I don't know if you can do anything about it, but you can certainly worry about it. That's for sure. But let's look, NHI, non-human identity, right? It's sort of like the identity topic du jour for the year 2025, and probably towards the end of 2024 is when it first really kind of got into the limelight. But it's not new. Non-human identities have been around forever. I mean, there's service accounts that have been around forever. Go back as far as the mainframe, right? And I'm sure even before that, right? Punch cards, probably had some of that too as well. So when we say non-human identity, I think what we've started to do is recognize that these identities do need to be managed as well, whether they are a carbon-based life form behind it or not, or if we want to debate the semantics of account versus identity. The problem is not new. It's almost like saying, well, identity is the new perimeter. It's been the perimeter for like 25 years, 30 years. So It's just, it's getting hot right now, which is cool. Right? Hey, I'm not going to knock it. Like that's great for people in the IAM space. But I don't know if I agree with like, that's like the future. I think it's the now, and it's the has been, not has been. That's probably wrong to put it, the history. But I hope that makes sense. I'm not saying it goes away. It's definitely going to be part of the future as well, though.
I kind of feel like you're right in terms of non-human identities have been around for as long as we've been in IT, but the problem has grown, right? So there are more devices on the network. The device has more importance in terms of the overall authentication picture, for example. So there's the device side of it, but then there's also the workload side of it, which I think you referenced. Sure, you have service accounts, but you also have robotic process automation. You also have people doing things with like Kubernetes and Docker and infrastructure as code and, managing your cloud environment. And so when I start to think about those things, look, if you have an organization that's like using word forms and copy as, are you probably doing a lot with Docker? Well, I don't know. There might be other people, like we put our money there. We want to make our infrastructure hum, or we hire somebody who's like a whiz kid and they're going and doing those things.
And they might be wearing Dockers. So there you go. There's your Docker container.
There you go. You pulled it all together right there.
I think I know where you're going with it. Like, okay. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. It's like, I think sometimes we forget about the average population. And I don't mean that negatively. I mean where most people are from like a company perspective, a maturity perspective, a capability perspective. There's just a lot of companies that are still kind of scraping by. And I mean, you and I know this, right? We talked to a lot of really smart people. Like, yeah, they know what they should be doing, but they don't get the funding to do what they want to do. Or, their strategic investments just aren't there yet to like modernize or improve things. And it's painful. And that's why I refer to all these IAM heroes out there that literally make the company work through sheer effort and will, in spite of, I have to send a fax to get an account made. I mean, like, it's 2025, but that still happens. It's crazy.
Yeah. So I'll be interested to hear what Eve has to say. Is this chasm or this gap between laggards and next gen IAM, is it worthy of a Venn chart? We'll find out.
I mean, we probably already know the answer to that. So for sure, we're recording this a little bit in advance. I'm going to tear down the fourth wall a little bit. We have not yet gone to EIC, but we're trying to make sure we have content to kind of carry over EIC and our vacations and things like that. So For people who are listening, just know that we are still yet to go there. And you've been gracious enough to join us and give us kind of a preview of what she's going to talk about. But don't forget, we still have an Identiverse discount code. We're going to be there. We're going to be just doing some cool stuff. So if you visit us there in Las Vegas, June 3rd to the 6th, if you use the code IDV25-IDAC25 to get you 25% off, it'll be in our show notes. And it's also on our homepage, idcpodcast.com. If you just scroll down, it'll be right there. But the cool thing we're doing, and we've started to get this out there, is we are bringing the Identi-Squabble game show to the Identiverse conference. So if you are familiar with what we put on at the Authenticate conference late last year with their help, we are rebranding it slightly, at least for the Identity at the Center, to Identi-Squabble. I'm going to be the MC/game show host, and Jim's going to be a team captain. And I think we're going to do IDAC versus ID Pro. So I think we've reached out to Heather, and she seemed to be in for it. You guys are going to pick your own teammates. Neither of you will be able to see the questions in advance. Only I have access to that. So I'm creating a list of identity questions, non-human questions, and maybe some Vegas questions to kind of keep things fun. We'll probably have time for maybe 3 or 4, but we're going to be kicking off the Expo sort of reception party that Tuesday night when things kind of open up for that kind of stuff. So I'm looking forward to that, and hopefully people will come out and see that. I'm trying to make it also a little more audience interactive. So maybe we'll have like lifelines that we can do where, if people aren't sure of answers, they can ask the audience, right? Or things like that. So I'm very much looking forward to that. Jim, do you have your teammates lined up yet, or are you still working on that?
No, I still have to work on that. So I mean, you just announced news that I wasn't even aware of. So Heather has agreed to be Team ID Pro's captain.
I mean, yeah, you should check your email.
Well, hey, man, I've got some other things going on. Sorry.
There is nothing more important than Identi-Squabble, Jim. This is the most important thing happening in the entire world in the next, let's call it 2 months.
I know. Not just for me. I mean, for the entire world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So IDAC versus ID Pro.
I think I reached out to Eve, and I think that she's not going to be there, right, Eve?
I'm going to be there for a little while. I'll probably have to miss Identi-Squabble, but I really like saying Identi-Squabble.
Yeah.
Can I just say?
I don't know if there's any reason to go to the conference if you're going to miss Identi-Squabble, but I'm just saying.
I'm sorry to miss that part. I want T-shirts out of that, though. There ought to be T-shirts.
There should be T-shirts. Well, maybe we can make it a recurring thing, and, we'll see. We'll see what we can do.
It's fun. You're not going to learn anything, but you're going to have fun and be entertained. So that's kind of the point of it. All right, let's formally introduce Eve. She's a digital identity futurist and strategist. She's the co-inventor of XML, SAML, UMA, and maybe other things that I'm not aware of. Privacy by Design ambassador. She's a board member. She's one of the IAM rock stars of the band ZZ Off. She's the president and founder of Venn Factory, and this is her 7th time on the show. Welcome back, Eve.
It is a delight. And a mystery at the same time.
That's how we like it around here. We don't know what we're doing. 7th time on the show. I think I mentioned before we hit record that you're approaching Andrew Shikiar of FIDO Alliance fame, who I think is the current record holder. I'm sure we'll get Andrew on later this year so we kind of get closer to the Authenticate conference, but you've been very generous with your time. You are actually, and Jim talks about this all the time, I don't know if he's ever mentioned it to you, you're like our first big get for the show.
Aw.
And we were so excited. It was like, oh my gosh, like Eve wants to do the show. Like, does she know what we're doing? And you probably didn't. That's fine. But you're very generous with your time and doing it to us. So we'll never forget that. It was kind of the one that's like, we actually could get some people on this show that people have heard of.
You had all the signs of greatness even then.
Well, flattery gets you everywhere in this show. So, I'll take it anytime we can get it. It was October, the last time you were with us. And I think actually you recorded maybe that one with Jim because I think I was traveling. And so we've been kind of talking about things in there. But I'd love to understand what's new in your world since the last time you were on back in October.
Gosh, so much. I mean, I've been growing Venn Factory. I've got some exciting new clients, preparing a 3rd white paper that I've written with a co-author for the first time. We're hoping to launch it in a kind of an e-commerce site that I'm working on putting up. And I got this great opportunity to go speak to South by Southwest about identity. So
that is so cool.
Thing.
I mean, how crazy is that to have, like an identity talk at South by Southwest? I joke about like, hey, they should make let's turn IDC into a Netflix show. But I mean, that's pretty close to the same kind of concept, right? I mean, what was it like being at South by Southwest?
It's fun. It was fun for sure. I did have an experience like 10 years ago where Joni Brennan was involved and a few other folks from the identity world. We were talking about IoT privacy back then. And so they've had some representation of, great tech topics over time. But like, I wanted to be sure to reach a whole bunch of folks who might not have identity context at all, even though they said, don't be too high level. I didn't want to leave people behind, so I really just tried to cover why individuals should care, why businesses need to care, and provide advice for everybody. So yeah, I had that opportunity. It was awesome. And just being in the, the zeitgeist of South by and walking around Austin with a bunch of other folks, hearing music from every corner, it doesn't suck.
I mean, that's totally like rock star, mentality, right? At that point, it's like, all right, we're going to hear from Eve about IAM, and then here comes this major band.
Here comes somebody I actually recognize from the movies walking down the street. Yeah, it's kind of like that.
I love your website. I think it's fantastic. It's one of the more well-designed ones that I've come across. I want to know, how do I meet the star of venfactory.com? And by that, I mean your adorable puppy or dog that is in your welcome video.
Sabrina. Yeah, she's way more popular than I am. I should have had her join me today. I'm happy to introduce you to. She cares about identity, but she doesn't know why.
Now, did she have a rider to get into that video where they're like, only carrot biscuits and green beans or, something like that? Like, what was her union rate to have her, be the talent on air?
Extra TREATS, basically.
That's right. You can't say the word out loud because it'll summon.
I'm so well trained.
Yeah,
can't
your
say
dogs,
CAMP, can't say
my
WLK.
Dogs will come flying in. You're like, treats. Do we hear treats? No, it's a great website. I encourage people to go check it out. I love the video. Anytime I think I see a dog on camera with like people, it's like, all right, yeah, I'm in. You sign me out.
Who doesn't love dogs? And who doesn't love Venn diagrams? So the answer to your question before is yes, of course. I'm sure there is some sort of chart that can be made.
Is it a Venn diagram when the circles completely overlap? I mean, it's like who loves dogs and Venn diagrams. Like it's the same people.
I mean, there is that ID Pro Slack channel that's all about identi-pets. So, I think there's probably a pretty good close to overlap, perfect overlap among the populations.
I will say this, though. So, Eve, you showed me the latest Venn diagram that you're working on. And it looks different. It wasn't like three intersecting circles, right? It's kind of like a...
correct.
I don't know.
Yes,
I don't know what
it
to
looks
call it,
more like
grid
a
pattern.
It looks more like a, I don't know, SR-71 Blackbird kind of shape.
Now you're speaking my language. Yeah. Blackbirds are an awesome jet.
Yeah. I used to have a poster of that on a wall at one point. Yeah. They're pretty cool looking. Yeah. It turns out you can't do sets. If you're comparing sets and you have more than 3 sets that you want to compare, you can't use circles. It's just sort of impossible. So you either have to have sort of rounded ellipses or you have to have kind of blocks, or you can be more creative than that. And so it's a 4-set Venn because I'm comparing 4 things. And it's all about kind of stakeholders and reasons to do identity. And, I think there's 4 basic reasons to do identity. And the problem is everybody in the organization, not to mention just regular human beings who have a stake, who care in the results.
So is this research that we'll see at some point? Like, where's this in the life cycle of the generation of it?
Yeah, I shared an early version of it, I think, at EIC previously, and I've done some more work. It's definitely going to be in the EIC talk, so people who may be watching this afterwards will have seen, but I'll be sharing it from stage. It's turning out to be very productive for me to be able to see what advice that I can give, not just tech vendors about like, well, who's your buyer persona kind of thing, but also enterprises around how to make sure that you have the right representation and have the highest bandwidth possible conversation around, who cares about the outcomes and how to succeed and how not to have somebody working against you, perhaps accidentally or perhaps not accidentally.
I mean, that's the kind of stuff that I think people eat up, because I mentioned IAM heroes early on, and the sad and unfortunate truth is most of us are operating underfunded, under-resourced. Like, there's just so much that needs to get done. And so anything you can do to, help convince the right people to say, this is an investment that is worthy, as much information we get on that. It's not going to be the right answer for everybody, right? But I think the more inputs we get into that, you can take this out if you're listening and shape your message to whatever's most appropriate, for your organization. So
totally. And you were talking about sort of laggards versus next gen. There's a lot of pull by clever people, innovators, vendors who are trying out new solutions. There's a lot of pull towards stuff that is just completely new. And it's hard to absorb. And, I've spent a lot of time, working with kind of the sell side. And, this is not meant to be pejorative towards anybody, but I think vendors live in the future because they've got to do that pull. They have to imagine, what went wrong and how to solve it. And they have to kind of be out there. And enterprises live in the past. And that's not sort of a bad thing. It's more like, if you think about the population of cars, I don't know, in any one country, in the US, there's going to be a distribution of ages of those cars, which is one of the things that makes connected car and IoT hard. Same thing with enterprise infrastructure. It represents buying decisions, of 20 years, of 50 years, of 100 years. Mm-hmm. So of course, the average age of that stuff is going to be older, and it's why you have to deal with legacy and have shim APIs and all the rest of it. So it's just the nature of the thing.
And that's where you get a lot of overlap too. Like you're trying to buy a product that is future facing, but oh, by the way, can it also support COBOL or RACF?
Totally. I mean, I think there's been some move off of AS400s, among the banks over time, but not 100%, right?
I still see tons of insurance companies using, a mainframe in the basement runs their entire operation. Yep. And it's crazy how much some of these technologies have just lived longer than they probably should have, but they do because they are serving a purpose, and there hasn't been that key reason like, okay, now we've got to go.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the conversation that often happens about, are you selling vitamins or a painkiller? And, if there's some big pain, okay, well, now there's a motivation and you can effect change and take care of tech debt and do all the rest of it.
That's such a good analogy. And hopefully they're like Flintstone vitamins and they taste good. I know we want to get into the EIC talk you're going to give here, but I do want to ask you about an earlier conversation we had way back, and that was around personhood credentials.
Yeah.
Any news in that area that we should be kind of picking up on?
From my perspective, there's a couple of interesting things. First of all, I'm seeing more and more folks who are in the verifiable credentials game, also the biometrics game, offering personhood kind of services, right? Or personhood credentials delivered into wallets. So I'm starting to see that there's some uptick in adoption around that kind of technology. The other thing that I've been noticing is, along with Dean Sachs and Mike Kaiser, I call myself the junior co-chair of the three, of the Death in the Digital Estate group, the DADE group. And we've been having kind of an interesting conversation around, do you need personhood information about somebody who's passed away? So, we talk about is a person. So I guess that sort of was a person, really did have a real world presence. And these are things that are hard to solve because you're not to be crude about it, you're not doing liveness detection in that case, right?
Yeah.
So these are important pieces of information. And what we've been learning about kind of looking at the government agency infrastructure of the world around how do you sort of inform important other downstream services that somebody has passed away? It's by no means a clean system with good data. It's a mess. So those are some of the considerations that I'm sort of coming across as I look across the landscape.
So it's interesting that viewpoint of is a person is in current tense, was a person as in past tense, which leads me to believe there is also probably going to be will be a person as in future tense. So how do you manage something that is past, present, and future? And I guess, what does personhood mean? Can you define that? Is it as simple as it's a human being, or is it beyond that?
There's different levels of what kind of information can be delivered about this notion. One, the most obvious to us, having been in the industry for a long time, is kind of full identity verification. So you're saying it's not just a random person. You're saying it's a person who really lives in the real world, and this person presenting this credential matches to that known real world person. That's identity verification. It's a kind of is a person. It's just very specific. There are other levels where it's more like this entity in front of me trying to operate this service or this application is is really alive, is really operating it in the moment, which is, on the other end of that continuum. And sort of in the middle is things we see with like age assurance, where you're doing age estimation. That's a kind of is a person of a particular category. And so wherever you have things like age restricted purchases, there's laws around age restricted purchase of a whole bunch of different things. In fact, in my South by Southwest talk, I was showing how, one state is thinking about age restricting skincare. Another one is age restricting, I don't know, other beauty products. It's kind of weird. So you can ask, is a person older than 18? It's kind of a species of personhood because it's less specific than any one particular.
Does personhood extend to non-persons? So this idea of, AI and agentic AI and all these other bots and service accounts and non-human identities, I feel like there should be a way to verify those credentials as well. So yeah, this really is the Venn diagram AI versus the, XYZ application, whatever it may be. Is there a space for non-personhood in addition to personhood?
I could swear that one of Dave Birch's newsletters had one of those wonderful cartoons about this, like, swear you're a bot or something. And that's kind of, we'd call that attestation, right? In the IoT world or device or, other non-human entities. And attestation of something is, it's definitely a thing. And I think it could be valuable. We have software statements and things like that we can use to assess whether it's really the client app that we thought it was, for example. So I think that it does generalize across beyond humans, although as usual, human versus non-human, say authentication, it's going to look different and care less in the non-human case about user experience. Which is good.
Let's talk about your EIC talk. On one level, you're talking about stakeholder management, which, depending on what you're into, that might not sound super interesting, but you're really talking about it in terms of its application in customer IAM, which I think, okay, that starts getting interesting because you're talking about all these different stakeholders outside of the technology space.
Yeah.
And even more than that, you're focusing on this space these spaces called Martech and Adtech. So all this starts to make it get really interesting really fast. Let's start with what are Martech and Adtech, because those might be new terms for people.
Yeah, so Martech is a very important tech stack that marketing folks run. And I would say the basis of it is kind of marketing automation, the ability to send out all those messages to, that are personalized, that get people to buy, that get people to go on to the buyer's journey. We've all experienced this. Oftentimes we talk about it from the privacy perspective of being sort of stalked. But of course, a lot of us also welcome this personalization in these digital products, in these experiences. So Martech is marketing technology, basically. So anybody who's ever, in a SIAM circumstance, you might have had to connect to Marketo, and there's a whole bunch of, folks who do what they do. That's part of it. Adtech is where you get into the data brokering marketplaces of the world, the things that make you be tracked with cookies or other similar technology, and have you as a kind of heuristic, fuzzy picture of a human be presented to these systems so that they can call it retargeting, where, that's how the ads get served to you and are personalized to you. And you're like, I swear, I was just talking about this, in the neighborhood of an Echo device yesterday, and suddenly I'm getting ads for the thing I was talking about. That's how that's happening, basically. So they very much care about identity, by the way, but they don't see it at all in the way that we see it. And it's kind of more expansive. There's even a standard in the space, kind of a standard, an industry driven standard called Unified ID 2.0 that I see very little talk about in our industry, but it's literally based on top of OpenID Connect. And so in the Venn diagram of that world and this world, that's one thing that's like right in the center, but like I don't think anybody's really aware, certainly on our side, about it.
So this is tied a lot to like e-commerce level CIAM, right? So who are the stakeholders that we're talking about? Who are the the main participants?
I would say, it starts at the CMO and might be like a chief digital officer, something like that as well. So, we have data lakes when we think about the security aspects of identity. We're interacting more and more with SOC teams. Like, we can talk about identity security and all the new acronyms and things like that, where there's some interesting tussles between the identity world and the security world and where identity even lives in security. But when it comes to this SIAM world and the fact that marketing and customer data management people own the proposition, and by the way, they're making a lot of money for that, whatever company, that's where we really have to care about the stakeholder question. Because I was looking up, so ID Pro has a great vision statement on the website. And it talks about the disciplines of digital identity and access management are globally seen as vital and vibrant counterparts to privacy and information security. That's great stuff. We don't have all the data or all the use cases in our purview to be able to really execute to that 100%. So that's why I think it's important to kind of start to empathize with the whole marketing side of the world and the customer data side of the world, because they absolutely have pains and needs around things in identity going well. Looking at your average description of SIAM and all the things that it can do. But they just don't know where to go to do better. And certainly they don't know where to go to do better at some of the privacy aspects. They interact a lot with privacy professionals, with privacy leaders. But again, there's, separate goals and sometimes competing goals there.
Is your research and your work focusing on consumers or customers of, say, a Martech or Adtech platform, or is your research more about how to run a Martech or Adtech platform from an identity perspective?
I guess I'd say where I came into this picture, it started with the whole EIC 2024 thing, where I went up there and said consent is dead and started to have a bunch of conversations about that. And, having been able to lean on a lot of great research that's been done. So, for example, by Internet Safety Labs, of which I'm a board member, I have to say that, and some other folks like Cracked Labs puts out a huge amount of great research. And so looking at all that stuff, I was sort of like, wow, did you guys know this identity resolution thing is scary? It's, heuristically figuring out people, and it can do it really well. And it has nothing to do with somebody logging in and confirming that they're them. So it started there. And then it proceeded to, what advice can I give identity practitioners and identity leaders about this situation? And so in the paper called Consent is Dead that I ultimately wrote, there's advice about that. And then I got the opportunity to go speak to a bunch of customer data people and Martech people. And that was super interesting. I had to really rethink everything and approach things from the perspective of really doing the work of empathizing with them. And one of the things that I'll share in the EIC talk, so people may have seen this already, is there's a great value framework that's been put together by a kind of marketing wizard guy, Kyle Martinovich, the CDP value framework. That's customer data platform. And that's something that didn't exist. CDPs didn't exist, back when, we were all coming up with OAuth and OpenID Connect, but it's existed for, the last 10 plus years, and everybody has one. Any, organization of any size that's consumer facing has one. And so here I was talking to these folks who care very much about that value framework, but wouldn't have known where to slot in the identity value that they can get by working with identity people. So that's some of what I'll be sharing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to make up a fictitious scenario, but let's say I sold training, right? And I was able to get data from a Martech platform on where Eve lives. Say you're coming to my website now. I know where you live. I know maybe something about your educational background. And I know something about your browsing history, so what you've been looking at. So now I can build my portal to have a specialized set of offerings. That seems to me that all those different things lead to kind of like a data governance question. Who owns those various pieces of data? And then that branches out to, well, who are the stakeholders who are, making the decisions around which of those data elements can be shared, which we can use for what source of information we use to overwrite those. I think you made mention to me that, there's like 2,000 attributes that are tracked about you that are kind of like, these are just known, like everybody who uses the internet, these are had on you.
Yes, basically that's true. And that stat is just so crazy. Like to us, hearing how identifiable we are, even if we didn't, consciously share that information or the right to have it be known. The average IAM profile, the average record might have 20 attributes. And the profiles they have on you that you may not be participating in are really at that 2 orders of magnitude, like 2,000. And
Right.
you can be identified, you can be tracked. These are when we start talking about surveillance and a whole bunch of unpleasant things. But the world is working this way now. And it's, by the way, working this way in Europe now, despite GDPR and all the protections that we think that they have kind of, at higher levels than maybe some other jurisdictions.
So what do you do about this? Because I think part of this is an awareness issue. So I was talking with a friend of mine over the weekend, and he was blown away when I showed him the ads preferences in Facebook and all the things it knew about him. And he was not even aware that all this stuff was taking place behind the scenes. And I feel like that is pretty average. That's pretty common, right? Unless you're in this space and you really care about it, chances are you're reading the EULA that flashes on the screen. Yep, accept. I just want to use the thing that I want to use. What do we do about this? Because there is so much data out there. And what happens if that data somehow gets poisoned? If it's incorrect data or wrong data, how do you correct it? How does it not impact, an algorithm somewhere that either denies you or shows you things that you don't want to see or, offensive or whatever it may be? Like, what can we do about this?
I mean, GDPR is one of the, pieces of legislation that gives people the right to go correct data that's incorrect, but it's pretty onerous to do, right? And I will say, when I was asked that question after I finished up talking about consent is dead last year, I was stuck for an answer. What do you do? What I chose to do for the South by Southwest audience was, I talked a little bit about zero trust and how they say assume breach, right? Which is a good assumption for both people and organizations. I suggested as well, they need to start assuming tracking. So assume breach, yes. Assume tracking, absolutely. Which is, that's not a piece of advice that's sort of actionable other than making you think before you share things you don't want to get out there. The other joke that might be made, and especially given where Identiverse is held these days, what happens on the internet stays on the internet. So like being aware is sort of the first thing. In terms of doing something about it as an individual, that can be really tough. There are things you can take on board that require some friction in your life to do. And that's not something I generally want to ask people to do. When it comes to identity professionals and what we can all do to support the efforts to give people more choice, give people more transparency when they are consumers of businesses and when you work for those businesses, I think we have to, if we take ID Pro's vision seriously, we have to try to do that. And that requires understanding the value that is being created for the business of each of those pieces of data. So when you were talking about data governance, Jim, I totally agree. The way that a privacy professional would see that is it's kind of a risk assessment for each piece of data collected. What I think we've been forgetting is the value assessment. It's not done on a sort of datum by datum basis at all. I think it's possible. I know of some technologies that enable that kind of thinking, but it surely requires all the different stakeholders to get together to agree on what's the model and who's responsible. Like if you could actually say, we store this piece of information, it's worth X to us, but it costs us X plus something. Well, now you can make an ironclad ROI case for not collecting it anymore, putting it on the edge, making it decentralized, maybe.
I wonder if choice is the key word here. You mentioned it earlier, and I was okay, well, what do we do about this? And I don't know if there's actually a good answer for that, right? I mean, it's just all this data is out there. It's out of your control for the most part. Is the future of data management when it comes to things like privacy and all these meta attributes that people are collecting, is it choice? Is it as simple as, yes, I will allow you to use my data in exchange for this, and because the service I find is valuable? And like Google Maps is a great example. nobody, most people, I say, walk around or have in their glove box actual physical maps anymore. It is
More's
far
the
rarer.
pity.
Right. I mean, I grew up the age of, you had a physical map. I lived in Northwest, or Northeast Illinois and Chicago area. So I had one for Wisconsin too. Right. And so I would have this map collection. Now it's Google Maps or Apple Maps or, whatever your mapping solution of choice is. But those are free products in quotation marks.
That's right.
You're the product at that point, right? It's your data that you are trading in exchange for the use of their service. So I think the awareness of, when you kind of say that to somebody who doesn't think in these terms is like, oh, it's free. No, it's not. Like, you're the product, right? Like it's collecting data by you. It's helping feed the algorithm that says where there's a traffic jam on Google Maps by the number of phones, right, that are lined up at a light. You're contributing to it, but you're also gaining a benefit out of it. And I think you've got the choice at that level. You can either choose to use Google Maps or Apple Maps or not. But a lot of these choices get hidden behind menus, and really they're a false choice. Are you really going to walk around with physical map? Sure. Maybe.
And there's some abuse in that, right? There's they talk about dark patterns or deceptive patterns of making it easier to make one choice over another. And you can sort of create a straight line to the business model from that. And that's something I've advocated for a long time. And it's starting to be picked up in some places, is the privacy policy really should be an explanation of the business model. And what out of the three ways that you could pay for the service, money, data, attention, eyeballs, are they actually leveraging? And, you'd think it'd be a simple thing of, well, you could do one or the other, but then we had this whole sort of pay or okay scandal around, well, are we leaving some people out because they can't afford to pay to have privacy? So these are unresolved questions. I think in the meantime, we can get sort of more incrementally improved systems that do respect choice. I do believe privacy is context, control, choice, and respect. Those are, hard things for an organization to really sign up to all at once. But I think it's possible if we work with the counterparts that are in charge of making money off of data, plain and simple.
Yeah, I have an example. So I was going through some old mail, and I get an updated privacy policy from my auto lender. And it had here's how we use your data. And one of the things was we share it with third parties, yes. And then it was whether or not you could control it. The answer was yes. And I was like, I'm going to save this. I'm going to go tell them not to share my data. And then I thought, am I actually going to spend the time to go and do that? It seems like it would be a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
Right.
And they probably aren't instrumented to do it well. And how do you prove that they did it? These are some of the questions that we've been looking at. Is there's ways to solve some of these, but the first thing you got to do is assess the appetite of that organization to change. If you're working from within it, right? If you're working on some identity program within it, you can start to ask, how open are they to something a little bit more innovative and turning away from the direct monetization of the personal data? And there are cases where that's possible. But there's kind of a maturity ladder there, and I think you need to sort of be responsive to what's possible there. Otherwise, you're banging your head against a wall.
And I feel like, okay, your mind goes to, well, we need more regulation, but then you get regulation. It's like everybody has their cookie policy now. It's like you can either accept it or beat it. And it's like, so you just say accept, or you try and close it without answering or something like that. So I don't know if more regulation is the answer. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not, because I think more regulation led to me getting that. Yeah, I mean, usually anything that comes out of that is, an idea that's not going to work very well. And then after it's out there, you wind up doing it and it's ineffective. But Jeff brought up a scenario earlier, which was, are you getting these spam? I'm not even sure if it was on this call. We talk so much, but it was, I keep getting these spam SMS messages that I owe money for toll roads. And I'm not worried if they're saying, hey, you were in San Francisco last week, so you might want to go to Joe's sourdough house. I'm okay with that. That doesn't bother me. What bothers me is like the low end spam, like nobody, the scam spam, I would call it.
Totally.
And
Yeah,
like,
the
how
sort
do
of
you end up,
smishing where
if I
they're
could block
just trying to get you to
that,
click the link.
yeah, I mean, if I could block that, I'm sure everybody's sitting there saying something similar. Like, if I could block that, I'd be a little bit happier in life.
The answer is very simple. Just don't use text messaging. Right? I mean, that's the obvious
kind of
answer.
friction-filled thing.
Right, but it's not realistic, right? We've grown to depend on these services. I mean, we get MFA through text messaging. So, I mean,
We shouldn't.
but it's still better than nothing, right? I mean,
And this is a case where, by the way, when I was saying enterprises live in the past, so, there are still organizations that are putting in place MFA with SMS OTPs right now. They haven't even, deployed it yet. And yet it's already been deprecated in the land of, folks who follow NIST 800-63. So like, some things get they degrade in quality over time. And yet if it takes a while to put in place the program, two of my banks have been rolling out voice authentication. And I want to say, deepfakes, like they just sort of missed the whole moment.
Yeah.
we just did an entire AI episode, so it's getting crazy.
Yeah, and actually, I heard that from some people that we sounded better on the AI version. So I'll have to keep that in mind.
All right, well, now
Just
I know.
replace yourselves.
Yeah, exactly. I'll just script every single episode from here on out. That is my goal, though. Like, I have an ulterior goal is at some point I'm going to have, AI voices of Jim, you and I, and maybe even a guest if I can get them to agree to it. That's going to be virtually indistinguishable. And the only thing you'll know is that there's no ahs, those little things, you breathing into the mic, like all that stuff. But I read a paper today that there is actually a new AI model that includes those things in it.
Oh, boy.
And so,
Of course there is.
at some point, you're not going to know.
And people will be directing their AI agents to go listen to the episodes, and then where will we be?
So Eve, let's get back on track. One of the things you told me was that you've been encouraging your clients to look at identity services as a product. So
Yes.
tell me a little bit about what that means.
So, if you have services that are available internally for app owners and others, marketers, whoever, who depend on those services, you got to be thinking about all the different customers for your product. And one of the trends that I've seen over the last few years is there are actually product managers in charge of identity and what it's delivering to the kind of internal ecosystem market. So this is where that 4-set Venn actually comes in. So for those who are product managers, you'll be aware of the jobs to be done kind of methodology, where you're really looking kind of under the covers of what people say they want out of a product. You're looking at what they actually need, kind of the end state of what they need. And that's where I sort of came up with the 4 things that I think identity delivers to different parties: protection, personalization, payment, and things people want. So the 4 Ps. So I think that it's possible to find all the different use cases. So security protection, privacy protection, fraud protection, all of the kind of cross-sell and upsell and, this whole CDP value framework that I was talking about, all the things that the marketeers want out of things that connect with identity. You can start to sort out what's important. And you can sort out who it's important to by looking at those 4 things and their intersections.
So being that this is the go-to podcast for the identity practitioner, I want to ask you, number one, from a practitioner perspective, what do we need to know about this topic, the stakeholder management, when it comes to CIAM and specific to thinking about this e-commerce situation where we have the Martech and the Adtech element to it? What do we need to know? And then do we own it? Is that IAM's to solve, or what is our role?
Sometimes the identity team owns some of this, and sometimes it clearly doesn't. It's interfacing with others who have the primary responsibility. And this is where, I'm going to say RACI chart, because it's just sort of the easy, go-to framework for this. One of the criticisms...
I was expecting a Venn chart.
I mean,
Or
there
Venn
is a
diagram.
Venn,
Right, yeah.
but like you have to, this is how you start sorting out like who kind of really owns what and who cares about what and to what level they care about it. And I would say you need to start looking at each of the use cases. So like I've seen a bunch of RFPs where all the use cases are broken down. And the interesting thing to me is they don't necessarily break down along product lines or on stakeholder lines. Like, the one example I always sort of reach for comes more from identity versus security, as opposed to this marketing conversation. Like, your CIO is going to care, and their folks are going to care a lot about fast, efficient, accurate provisioning. It's the people who are risk-facing who care about fast, accurate deprovisioning. Are you looking at a different product? No. So that's kind of the challenge. And so like I was just talking to some folks, a bunch of CISOs who were talking about is the identity team part of your security team? And what they were seeing was about 50% are. And I don't know if that tracks with your experience, but it just shows the challenge of trying to sort through, well, do you own it? Well, up through the chain I do, or directly I do, or, how does the SOC team interact with the identity team when we've got this whole new identity security landscape? Those are some of the questions you can start to sort.
I think my experience with this kind of tracks to what Jeff was saying earlier, like the clients that I've worked with. So usually when I get called in to kind of like herd the cats, it's because the IAM person is the leader. The IAM person is trying to get all these stakeholders together to do some sort of digital transformation or something like that. One of the biggest topics that I find that needs to be done is that you have all the people who are more than happy to represent their lane. Informational security will represent the lane of security and the risk side of the house. And IT, fast, efficient, secure, we're using the right platform, we got the right infrastructure. Marketing, I just want to sell more stuff. And somebody's got to get all that to, okay, there's only going to be one website, not 3 different websites,
Right.
for example, a website. But then also, I think one thing that you've got to do if you're like trying to herd all these people is get them to be empathetic to the needs of the other groups, because it's like everybody's swimming in one pool. There's no, you guys stay over here, you guys stay over there. It's all just one body of water.
Yep. And this is why even with all the AI tools to help things, it comes down to human relationships, even working within an organization. And I don't see a way to really change that. We're going to have to talk to each other, and we're going to have to figure it out. And we're going to have to clarify some things that are still kind of squishy.
Yeah. So, I think a lot of what we're talking about sounds a lot like identity security. And what are your thoughts there? I mean, like identity security definitely seems to be kind of this new concept, which I think we're all trying to wrap our heads around. Is it actually any different, or are we just talking about the same stuff differently?
I'm glad that the stakeholder conversation is happening more in earnest now. It's couldn't come at a better time, because we do need to contribute with identity to the security conversation more than ever, because there's problems more than ever, right? And so that's the challenge that identity has in that it's not, if it really is an internal product to a whole bunch of stakeholders, it's doing something important, and it's one of those things that's supposed to be securing things better. But what happens when it's a source of insecurity? That's like embarrassing. Let's just call it what it is. So that kind of dual nature of identity has been the challenge. And I think what's coming to the fore is we do have new technologies. We have AI. People are using graph. We're getting better visibility across kind of the identity estate. And that's enabling us to have better solutions to closing gaps, tying up loose ends, doing a good job of whatever it was we were doing in the first place. So I kind of like that we've got these new augmentations of capabilities that are just giving us better sight over everything. the arguments about like what is ITDR a thing, like that's all over now. We seem to have some rough agreement in the industry around, what does ITDR mean? What does ISPM mean? But I like identity security as a bucket, as a kind of a sub bucket.
Yeah, I like identity security as a bucket because it's pushing the identity practitioner to think about more than just what's in their lane. But where I stop is that I don't think this puts these things in our lane just because we have to be aware of them, just because we have to contribute to them. Say something like logging and alerting, or defending their perimeter. All these things, because they use an identity element now, doesn't make them something that the identity practitioner owns. Just like, in the olden days when we ran all of our stuff on servers, just because we put our identity software on a server didn't mean that we own the server, right? The infrastructure team owns the server. Just because we contribute to policies and standards doesn't mean we own, the governance processes around, turning those into controls and, testing those controls. That's owned by the audit team. We always had to work with other people. We need to know how their lanes operated to some extent. We need to contribute to some extent, but it doesn't mean we own those things. I think identity security, almost put it this way, there's all these companies at identity conferences now saying we're, identity security. So the people who go to identity conferences are mostly identity practitioners, right?
This was the conversation I was just having, is like, well, where are these tools being used? And so far I'm seeing kind of an even split between explicit identity teams and like SOC teams, right? Because, and in a way that's elevating identity to a new level of visibility for the CISO. And, the Cheeto conversation seems to have subsided a little bit, but, I do see CISOs having a lot more knowledge, direct knowledge about identity needs and problems and solutions. So, I mean, it can't be a bad thing, right? We were a small town, we're growing into a bigger city. Those are, I think, good things, but we do have to have that conversation, maybe in each organization, about, well, what's the structure of who owns what? We just talk about it.
Well, I wonder if it's time for a macro discussion around this space of identity, because I hear identity risk and I hear a qualifier. Oh, well, we care risk. I hear identity security, another qualifier. I only care about security. Identity, privacy, and consent, more qualifiers. Mm-hmm. Is it just identity? And then I started thinking, well, is it digital identity? No, digital is another qualifier, right?
What the heck is identity?
Right, yeah. and now we start to get into, physical identity, right? Or, your human being identity, right? Stuff like that. And every time I hear something identity, it's some sort of qualifier. Identity at the center. Guess what? Qualifier.
You're part of the problem. But honestly, I mean, this is why, if you're going to have a shared service, and if the service is going to be shared widely enough, it's going to touch every part of the organization and be subject to all of those kind of shearing forces more than anything else. And that's something we haven't really looked in the eye as a challenge until recently. And I'm glad of that conversation, right? It's like, let's figure out what it's valuable for. All the things it's valuable for every company. It's going to be a little different, actually. And that's okay. But, there's value in a service that's so widely used to do so many things. Just means that the picture looks a little diffuse when you hand out ownership for any one piece of it.
Well, maybe it's time to have an identity team, not an infosec team or an infrastructure team. And that identity team probably has a broad set of skill sets that takes it across any number of areas. I don't know, right? I mean, there's any number of ways that we can slice this one out, but every time I hear something new in identity, it's like, okay, it's a new concept, right? One of the episodes we've done a lot fast is what's the difference between digital identity and identity and access management? And
I remember that one.
We had 48 different answers from 48 different people, right? And,
yeah, but mine was right.
Oh, well, of course, yes. Because the context in which you were answering it was right.
Right.
And that was the big thing, was like, okay, it depends on who you're talking to and blah, blah, blah. And so, okay, so now it's identity security. I'm going to guess in 6 months to a year, somebody's going to start calling it identity risk or some other juicy acronym that we can kind of rally behind. That's great. I like to just get to the space of, okay, we're in identity. We do identity things. And so that encompasses all of this stuff. Usability, risk, privacy,
Yep.
consent, governance, laws, regulations, right? All that stuff is really under the identity umbrella. That's a big umbrella.
It is. That's what it looks like. That Venn diagram looks like an umbrella.
There you go. See, that's how we tie it all together. So I asked you, we asked you all the hard questions about identity. Or maybe they're easy, depending on how we want to go on this. We want to end the show on a lighter note. And the question I've got for you is a would you rather question. So would you rather have a 1-minute conversation with yourself from the past or a 1-minute conversation from yourself in the future?
Every time I look back on my past, I think, gosh, I don't know, 10 years ago, 6 years ago, 50 years ago, whatever, I was clueless. I didn't know anything.
Well, at least you're saying that then. I'm still saying that now. I was like, I don't know what's going on.
I'm still, I mean, any time in the past, I was definitely more clueless than I am now. So my vote is I want to have a 1-minute conversation with myself in the future.
And what would you tell yourself? Would it be, here's a stock tip, buy Apple?
I was just rereading an old Ray Bradbury short story called Night Call Collect, where it's an old guy, one guy stuck on Mars who keeps getting called by his younger self on the phone.
That sounds cool.
It is cool and sort of frightening. It keeps making me think like AI agents and delegation and on behalf of stuff. You know, these are the questions it's bringing up in my mind. But like, would I rather have been the young guy or the old guy? And I think thinking about the story, so maybe some of the watchers and listeners will know the story. I mean, I'd rather be the young guy because everything looks great for the future and all the possibilities are still there. So when I'm asking myself a question, am I the younger me or the older me asking the question? Just making me think too hard.
Well, that's what I said. Maybe it's the harder question out of all this stuff. Let's go back to the identity stuff. That stuff we know. Jim, what about you? Would you talk to yourself from the past or talk to yourself from the future? And I'm going to exclude talk to yourself in the current because I know you already do that.
Yeah, I definitely do that. I'm going to go with my future self because I'd rather get advice. I mean, sometimes I wish I was younger again and could do certain things over again, but I don't know if what would I have more money or things like that. Yeah, certainly I could have set that up, but 1 minute you could do it exactly what you said. Invest in Apple. Okay, so now you have more money. Is that what would make your life better? Everything that happened between your younger self and now, you're here now. So you didn't die in a car accident or something like that. You couldn't avoid that by going and visiting your younger self. Now, if you're sitting there and like something had happened to you and you're like, okay, I got to say, don't get on that plane to, wherever, because that would be like really bad. That's what ruined your life. I don't have one of those like moments. I've just got a series of bad decisions that I've made over time.
Like starting a podcast and trying to do one episode every week.
I think talking to myself from the future would yield me like, okay, let's say I talk to 80-year-old self and I'm 50 now. I've got some advice for like, what should I do for the next 30 years? Maybe I would future self would say, buy Apple. I don't know. Right. But it might be like, hey, retire younger or do these things or don't quit working don't retire at 55. I don't know. But I'd like to have that advice now.
So I think this is an interesting question. It's are you satisfied with your past? Really kind of determines, and your current state would really determine whether or not you want to talk to your future self or your past self. Like, do you go back in time essentially and try to correct a mistake or position yourself better from wherever you currently are, or are you in a good spot right now and you want to make sure you stay in that good spot or get to a better spot, in the future? Maybe that's where you talk to your future self. I just thought of a sci-fi twist to this. Ooh. So let's take that same question and let's say you can choose, right? You can go as far back or as far forward as you want and everybody can do it. But you can only go as far forward as you are alive. And so some people, like, oh, I'll go 30 years in the future, and they don't get a phone call. Or 10 minutes in the future, they don't get a phone call.
Whoa.
Right? That knowledge of something is going to happen in my future between 0 and X number of days of when I decide I want to receive that phone call.
Oof.
How does that affect the rest of your life?
It's like the questions we face. Do we do genetic testing to find out?
That's like Twilight Zone stuff.
I know.
Right there.
This is like an
Remember
episode
that
of Black
show,
Mirror.
Twilight
Black
Zone?
Mirror.
Yeah. I still haven't watched a new season yet, so I'm behind on that one. But yeah, for those Black Mirror fans, this is turning into a Black Mirror episode or a Twilight Zone, same kind of thing.
Oh dear.
Okay. I feel like I absorbed some of Jim in that one because I took it maybe down a little bit downer route. So
Yeah, dark, man.
I've got just the upper you need. Do you want to
Okay.
meet the real star of
yeah,
VennFactory.com?
let's get Sabrina on here while you're going to get she was very disappointed about a lot of the privacy and consent talk that we were talking through, and you could tell that she really wanted to join the conversation as we were kind of getting there.
All right.
But there she is. Sabrina.
See? Your
Star of-
fans await.
Star of VennFactory.com, star of now of the Identity Center YouTube channel.
Is she
How
a
old is
Chihuahua?
Sabrina?
Part Chihuahua?
6.5.
6.5. And what kind of dog?
Pomeranian Chihuahua miniature poodle.
Okay.
She's a Pomchipu.
And she's a sweet girl. She looks a
Yes, she
lot
is.
like one of my puppies. It was an Australia dog or Carolina dog, I should say. Looks like an Australian Shepherd, Shibu, sort of like that. And it has the same kind of colorings and stuff like that. So when I was researching, for this episode and I went to your website, I saw that video, I called my wife downstairs. Like, look, this is the best part of this website right here.
I had to do it with her because otherwise she was like interfering with the shot. So, that way she helped me.
Well, dogs are always welcome on this show, right?
Awesome.
You know what I
Okay.
always think of when I see a Chihuahua? Yo
Quiero
quiero
Taco
Taco
Bell.
Bell.
Okay, I don't know how we can top that. So let's end with Sabrina and Eve. Thank you so much for taking the time with us. We're going to have a bunch of links in our show notes. Connect with Eve on LinkedIn. Visit her website, VennFactory.com, VENN, factory.com. Say hello to
right.
Sabrina as you click that video on the front. And our discount codes are always on our homepage, idcpodcast.com. Like and subscribe, share with friends, share with enemies. Doesn't matter. As long as people are listening, like and subscribing, don't really care. And that's it. We'll go ahead and leave it for this week. Thank you, Eve. Thank you, Sabrina.
Always a pleasure.
And we'll talk with you all in the next one.
Take care.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.